Imagine coming home from a trip only to find the police waiting for you and your neighbor living in your house like she owned it. Lorraine Pritcher had always said she could spot trouble before it walked through the gate. But trouble, in her mind, was never what most people imagined. On that warm Friday afternoon in Scottsdale, Arizona, she was watering her potted petunias when a charcoal SUV rolled up to the largest home on Alder Bend Drive. It was the kind of vehicle she associated with outsiders, and she watched it slow to a stop right in front of the white stone mansion, a property she kept tabs on more than she did her own. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a dark travel jacket, sunglasses still on, rolling a black carry-on behind him. His stride was unhurried, but confident, like someone who belonged there. Lorraine didn't see it that way. She reached for her phone almost reflexively, her mind racing with suspicion. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man about to enter a vacant home on Alder Bend Drive, she said without a pause, her eyes never leaving him. I think he's breaking in. Send someone quick. Inside the SUV, Terrence Blakemore had no idea his return from London was about to turn into a neighborhood spectacle. His body still carried the stiffness of the 10-hour flight, and all he wanted was a shower and a proper meal. He'd come back 2 days earlier than planned, partly to surprise his fiancée, and partly because he missed the quiet of his own space. But before his suitcase wheels even touched the driveway's smooth pavers, he heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance, growing louder. By the time he reached the front steps, the flashing lights were already bouncing off the mansion's stone facade. 2 patrol cars pulled up, tires crunching over the curb. Sir, can you step away from the door? One of the officers called out, hand resting on his hip holster. Terrence turned, eyebrows raised behind his sunglasses. Excuse me, this is my home. We just need to ask you a few questions, the second officer said, his tone measured. We received a report of suspicious activity. From across the street, Lorraine stood with one hand shading her eyes, lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't about to hide her involvement. In her mind, she was the hero here. Suspicious activity? Terrence repeated, setting his carry-on down. I just got back from a trip. I live here. You want my ID? You want to see my mail? I can unlock the door right now. The first officer glanced at Lorraine before stepping closer. Sir, we'll need to confirm your story. Could you provide identification and proof of residence? Terrence exhaled slowly, pulled his wallet from his jacket, and handed over his driver's license. Check the address, then check the deed. It's in my name. One officer went back to the patrol car to run the details. The other stayed nearby, eyes scanning the property as if expecting someone else to appear. A couple of neighbors, drawn by the commotion, lingered at the edge of their lawns, murmuring to each other. Sir, everything checks out, the officer finally said, handing back the license. Apologies for the inconvenience. You're free to go inside. Apologies? Terrence said, his voice sharp. Who even made this call? I did, Lorraine said, stepping forward, her chin raised as though daring him to challenge her. This house has been empty for days. I saw someone unfamiliar, so I acted. That's what a good neighbor does. Terrence stared at her for a moment, trying to process the audacity. Unfamiliar? You've seen me before. I've lived here for years. Lorraine's expression didn't change. I don't keep track of every visitor. I thought you might be trespassing on my own property. Terrence asked, his voice tightening. Do you call the cops on every neighbor who comes back from a trip, or just certain ones? Lorraine's jaw shifted slightly, but she didn't answer. The officers exchanged a glance before one of them said, Sir, you're free to enter your home. If there's anything else, we'll be around. Terrence turned the key in the lock, eager to put this humiliating scene behind him. But the moment he pushed open the door, a strange smell hit him. Lavender candles mixed with something warm and savory, like chicken stew, the kind of smell that didn't belong in an empty house. He stepped inside, dragging the suitcase over the threshold, and froze. In the corner of the foyer sat a pair of women's sandals he'd never seen before. But the real shock was still waiting deeper inside the house, and Terrence was about to find out just how far this good neighbor had gone. The sandals by the door were the first red flag. Terrence stood there a moment, his hand still gripping the handle of his suitcase. He didn't own sandals like that, They were coral pink with a scuffed strap, the kind of thing you'd find in a clearance bin at a beach shop. And they absolutely didn't belong in his $3.4 million Scottsdale home. "Sir?" one of the officers called from behind. "Is everything all right?" Terrence turned slowly. "Not exactly. Someone's been in here." Lorraine's voice cut through the dry desert air. "That's impossible. I've been keeping an eye on the place myself. No one's been inside." Her words made Terrence blink. "Keeping an eye on the place?" he repeated. "How exactly?" "I check in sometimes, to make sure nothing suspicious is going on," she said, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The officer stepped forward, sensing tension brewing. "Let's just confirm if anything's out of place, sir. If you'd like, we can walk through with you." Terrence nodded, motioning them inside. He wheeled his suitcase a few feet before stopping in the hallway. The faint scent of perfume, not his fiancée's, hung in the air. He knew his house down to every creak and draught, and something about the atmosphere felt lived in. The living room told the rest of the story. On the coffee table sat a half-empty bottle of Chardonnay, 2 wine glasses with smudged lipstick, and an open magazine from last week. A throw blanket from the guest bedroom draped over the couch as if someone had napped there. Terrence pointed. "Does this look empty to you?" Lorraine's eyes flicked to the wine bottle, then back to him. "You were just what?" he pressed. "Hosting guests? Drinking wine? Sleeping on my couch?" The officers exchanged a glance. One took out a small notepad, jotting details. "Ma'am, are you saying you've been inside this home while the owner was away?" Lorraine's tone shifted to defensive. "I was safeguarding it. I noticed a stranger leaving last week, a woman carrying cleaning supplies. I didn't know if she belonged here." "That's my housekeeper," Terrence said, his voice tightening. "She's been cleaning this place for years." Lorraine didn't flinch. "Well, I couldn't be sure. With all the crime these days, you can't be too careful." Terrence moved toward the kitchen. There, the fridge told the rest of the story. Groceries he hadn't bought, leftovers in glass containers he didn't own, and a bag of apples he'd never seen. His pristine kitchen counter now held a coffee mug and a spoon still flecked with cereal milk. "You've been living here," he said, the accusation plain. Lorraine shifted her weight. "Temporarily. I thought it was safer if someone was inside, to deter anything from happening." The younger officer looked at her sharply. "Ma'am, you realize this is trespassing. Even if you had good intentions, you can't occupy someone's home without permission." "I had a key," she shot back, as if that somehow justified it. Terrence's head snapped toward her. "You had a key? How?" Lorraine's gaze slid sideways. "Back when I chaired the security committee, we kept spares for emergencies. I guess mine was never collected." The older officer stepped in. "That's not standard procedure, ma'am. We'll need to make a note of this for our report." From outside, more neighbors had gathered. Curious faces pressed between the metal bars of ornate gates, whispers passing between them. Some looked embarrassed to be watching. Others looked entertained. Terrence's jaw tightened. "So let me get this straight. You called the cops on me, claiming I was breaking into my own home, while you were actually living in it?" Lorraine didn't answer right away. "I didn't see it that way." "Oh, I'm sure you didn't," he said, bitterness creeping in. The officers clearly sensed the standoff was escalating. "Mr. Blakemore, would you like us to remain here while you assess the rest of the property? If any personal items are missing or damaged, we can document them now." "Yes," Terrence said, his voice low but firm. "We're doing that." He led them toward the guest wing, an area he rarely used. But as he turned the corner, his steps slowed. Suitcases lined the wall. A neatly folded laundry basket sat on the bed. On the nightstand was a framed photo of Lorraine with 3 other women, wine glasses raised in a toast. "This isn't just you checking in," Terrence said. "You moved in. You treated my house like a hotel." Lorraine's cheeks colored, but she stayed silent. The younger officer scribbled more notes. "Ma'am, you'll need to collect your belongings under our supervision, and we'll be having a separate discussion about this." From the doorway, Terrence stared at the scene, at the evidence of someone inserting themselves into his private life without permission. It was invasive, disrespectful, and humiliating, all in one. But as much as this moment burned, The real storm wasn't about to hit until the neighbors took sides, turning this already absurd situation into a full-blown community war. The officer's presence had shifted from an initial suspicion of Terrence to an obvious discomfort with the facts now surfacing. Lorraine, however, wasn't showing a shred of remorse. If anything, she seemed more annoyed that she was being challenged than embarrassed at having been caught. One officer, Officer Delaney, adjusted his sunglasses and said, "All right, Mr. Blakemore, we'll need to confirm ownership through dispatch. It's just procedure, even though your ID matches the address." Terrence pulled his phone from his pocket. "I can make it easier. I have a PDF of the deed right here. It's on my cloud drive. Want me to airdrop it?" Officer Delaney smirked faintly. "That'll work." He tapped a few buttons, and seconds later, the officer was scrolling through the legal document bearing Terrence's name and the full Alder Bend Drive address. The younger officer, Ramirez, looked at Lorraine. "Ma'am, I think this confirms the property belongs to him." Lorraine's lips twitched as if she was swallowing back a retort. "I didn't say it didn't. I said I was worried about strangers, that's all." "That's not all," Terrence shot back. "You said you saw someone unfamiliar, so you broke into my home with a key you weren't supposed to have, and you stayed here for 2 weeks. That's not neighborly concern. That's squatting." "I wouldn't call it that," she said coolly. "I was protecting the property. Anyone could have come along and vandalized it." Terrence's tone was dry. "Right. Because nothing says property protection like using my wine, eating my food, and sleeping in my bed." Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "I never touched your bed." "Oh, forgive me. The guest wing. My mistake," he said, his sarcasm cutting through the heavy air. Officer Ramirez stepped between them. "All right, let's keep this civil. Mr. Blakemore, can you confirm if anything is missing or damaged?" Terrence gestured toward the kitchen. "The food, obviously. And the wine. She's been throwing events here. I mean, there's an entire trash bag in the bin outside full of takeout containers, not the kind I buy." Ramirez took notes while Delaney radioed something to dispatch. The sound of static and clipped voices crackled over the radio. Then Delaney nodded slightly. "Confirmed on our end. You are the owner. And yes, your housekeeper's vehicle matches the description in the earlier report. She's been here on schedule, as you stated." Terrence's jaw tightened. "So my housekeeper was the suspicious person you called the police about?" Lorraine didn't blink. "Yes." "And you didn't think to maybe ask me before accusing her of breaking in?" "You weren't here," she said simply. Terrence let out a humorless laugh. "That's the point. You're not supposed to be here either. This isn't your business." The neighborhood had grown even more curious. A man in gym shorts and a faded Arizona State t-shirt jogged past slowly, pretending to check his watch but clearly eavesdropping. 2 women with sun hats were now openly filming with their phones. Terrence turned toward them and called out, "You all might as well take notes for the HOA meeting." One of the women chuckled under her breath. The other looked away. Lorraine, however, seemed unfazed by the attention. "I think most people here appreciate what I've done. Not everyone wants strangers hanging around an empty property." Terrence stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You mean people you don't know, or people you've decided don't belong here? There's a difference." Lorraine's expression hardened, but before she could speak, Officer Delaney cut in. "We're not here to debate intentions. Here's what's happening. Mr. Blakemore, you're in the right. Ma'am, you'll need to vacate immediately. If you refuse, we'll have to proceed with a trespassing charge." A flicker of panic crossed Lorraine's face, quick but noticeable. She crossed her arms tighter. "Fine, I'll leave, but I'm taking my things with me." "That's fine," Terrence said. "You can take whatever you brought, but if anything of mine is missing, we're filing charges." Lorraine shot him a glare, but turned toward the guest wing to begin gathering her belongings. The officers followed her, partly to supervise, partly to ensure this didn't turn physical. Terrence stood in the living room, running a hand over his face. The adrenaline from earlier was ebbing, leaving room for the frustration to settle in fully. He could already see where this was going. The HOA politics, the gossip, the way stories like this always got twisted until the truth was just one version among many. He muttered to himself, "She calls the cops on me, and I'm the one explaining myself. Unreal." Outside, more cars slowed as drivers tried to catch a glimpse. A teenage boy on a skateboard rolled past, asking a neighbor loudly, "What happened?" The neighbor whispered something in return, gesturing toward the house. Terrence knew that by sunset, everyone within 3 blocks would have their own version of this story, but if he thought the worst was over now that she was packing up, he was wrong, because Lorraine wasn't leaving quietly, and the neighborhood was about to split into factions like it was the start of some suburban war. The sound of Lorraine's sandals slapping against the tile as she stomped toward the guest wing was louder than it needed to be. It was a statement, one meant for him and anyone else listening. Terrence stayed in the living room for a moment, trying to control the anger building inside him. But when he heard a drawer slide open in the distance, his patience snapped. "Hey!" he called out, his voice echoing down the hall. "You don't need to be going through my drawers. I'm just getting my things." Lorraine's voice came back, defensive and clipped. The officers were with her, but even from the living room, Terrence could feel the tension radiating through the house. He decided to follow, his sneakers squeaking lightly against the polished floors as he headed for the guest wing. The first thing he saw when he stepped inside was a suitcase sprawled open on the bed. But it wasn't filled with Lorraine's clothes. Half the space was occupied by bottles of wine, some still wrapped in tissue paper from his own wine cellar. There was also a stack of his dinner plates, separated by layers of bubble wrap. Terrence stopped in the doorway, his eyes narrowing. "You're packing my stuff?" Lorraine didn't turn around. "I was holding on to these, for safekeeping." "Safekeeping?" Terrence's tone sharpened. "That's my 2015 Cabernet Reserve, and those plates are from my grandmother's set. Safekeeping means keeping them in my house, not in your suitcase." Officer Ramirez stepped in quickly. "Ma'am, that's not your property. Please put it back immediately." Lorraine sighed loudly, as if this was all a ridiculous inconvenience. "Fine, but if something had happened to them while you were gone, you'd be thanking me." Terrence didn't even respond. Instead, his eyes scanned the rest of the room. His guest bathroom stocked with toiletries he didn't buy, a makeup bag on the counter, and a brand new bathrobe hanging on the back of the door. He turned to Officer Delaney. "Do you see this? She's been living here, not checking in. Living. Full time." Delaney nodded, jotting notes again. "We'll document it all." That was when Terrence noticed something else. A stack of envelopes on the nightstand. His mail. He stepped closer and flipped through it, seeing his name and address on every single one. Credit card statements. A notice from his bank. Even a letter from his insurance company. "You've been opening my mail?" he asked, looking directly at her. Lorraine finally turned, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I was making sure there wasn't anything urgent. You should be grateful I caught that late fee notice before it got worse." Terrence let out a sharp laugh. "Grateful? You've been going through my personal information. You don't see how insane this is?" Lorraine's expression didn't change, but the silence from the officers made it clear they were just waiting for this to wrap up. Then came the final straw. When Terrence walked into the adjoining sitting area, he stopped dead in his tracks. His favorite leather armchair, the one he kept in his home office, was there, but it wasn't in the condition he'd left it. The seat was covered in crumbs, and the side table next to it had a wine ring etched into the wood. "All right, that's it," he said, shaking his head. "Officers, I want this documented. Everything. Every glass, every bottle, every piece of mail. I don't care how small it is." Ramirez nodded. "We'll take a full inventory before she leaves." Lorraine muttered something under her breath, but when Terrence asked her to repeat it, she stayed silent. That's when one of the neighbors, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat, appeared at the doorway. "I heard what's going on," she said quietly. "You should know she's been telling people you abandoned the place. Said you were barely here and that it was better for someone to look after it." Terrence stared at her. "She said what?" The woman nodded. "Some people believed her, some didn't, but she's been pretty vocal about it." Terrence felt the air shift around him. This wasn't just about his home anymore. This was about his reputation in a neighborhood where perception traveled faster than truth. Officer Delaney's voice broke the moment. "Let's keep moving. Ma'am, gather the rest of your things and head outside." Lorraine glanced at the neighbor in the doorway, then at Terrence, and smirked. "Looks like the whole block's interested now." Terrence didn't reply. His mind was already racing, picturing the conversations happening behind closed doors, the version of this story that would spread before the night was over. But what he didn't yet realize was that the neighbors weren't just talking, they were choosing sides, and the split was about to get ugly. By the time Lorraine had piled her things in the foyer, the word had already spread beyond Alder Bend Drive. People were showing up from 2 streets over, strolling casually past the mansion like they'd suddenly taken up evening walks. Some nodded politely at the officers, others whispered behind cupped hands. Terrence stood with his arms crossed, watching Lorraine arrange her belongings in the most conspicuous way possible. 3 suitcases, 2 tote bags, a folded quilt, and a grocery sack that looked like it had been hastily filled with whatever she could grab. "Don't you think this is humiliating enough?" Terrence asked, gesturing to the growing audience outside. Lorraine zipped her largest suitcase without looking up. "I don't feel humiliated. I was doing the right thing." "The right thing?" Terrence's laugh was sharp. "You called the cops on me, told my neighbors I abandoned my home, and threw wine nights in my sunroom. What part of that is the right thing?" Lorraine finally looked at him, her chin slightly tilted up. "You're welcome, by the way. If I hadn't been here, who knows what could have happened? You think your housekeeper could have stopped someone from breaking in?" "My housekeeper has a job here. You don't." Terrence shot back. "And you weren't protecting anything. You were making yourself comfortable." She glanced at the officers, as if expecting one of them to step in. "I didn't break in," she said firmly. "I used a key that was given to me when I was on the HOA security committee." "Which you should have returned years ago," Terrence said. "Holding on to it wasn't some neighborhood duty. It was you keeping a way to get into other people's homes." Officer Delaney spoke up. "Ma'am, having unauthorized access to someone's property is not legal, no matter how you justify it." Lorraine folded her arms. "I don't care what you call it. I know this neighborhood better than anyone. I've lived here 20 years. I've seen people come and go, renters trashing lawns, delivery guys casing houses. I know what to look for." "You don't look for things by moving in," Terrence said, his voice rising. Lorraine shrugged. "Sometimes you have to take action. You were gone. The house was empty. A woman was leaving with bags of stuff. My cleaning lady was leaving with laundry because she cleans my house," Terrence interrupted. Lorraine ignored him and kept going. "And I thought, not on my watch. So I started coming by. At first, just to check. Then I realized it would be safer if someone stayed. I kept the lights on, brought in the mail, kept the place looking lived in. That's a deterrent." "A deterrent?" "You were the trespasser," Terrence said, his voice hard. "You turned my home into your clubhouse. You used my things. You drank my wine. You went through my personal mail." Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "I was keeping an eye on your bills in case something important came through. If you can't see that I was helping, that's your problem." From the doorway, a neighbor spoke up, an older man named Victor Delmar, leaning on his cane. "Lorraine, you crossed the line this time." She shot him a glare. "Stay out of it, Victor." "No," Victor said, stepping a little closer. "You've been bossing everyone around for years like you own this street. Now look, you've embarrassed the entire neighborhood. You made us all look like fools." Lorraine's cheeks flushed. "You wouldn't understand. You rent." Victor let out a short laugh. "You think that matters? Wrong is wrong. And what you did to Terrence was wrong," the crowd outside murmured, some agreeing with Victor, others muttering under their breath that Lorraine was just being a good neighbor. Terrence looked at the officers. "Can we speed this up? I'd like her out before the sun sets." Ramirez nodded. "We're almost done. Ma'am, do you have anything else inside?" Lorraine hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. "No, but you all should remember. I've done more for this neighborhood than anyone here." Terrence stepped forward, lowering his voice so only she and the officers could hear. "That's over now. Nobody's going to trust you again." Lorraine's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no smugness, just a flash of something else. Resentment, maybe even fear. But as she stepped out into the desert sunlight, bags in hand, the tension didn't leave with her. It spread, seeping into every conversation, every whispered opinion. The neighborhood was now officially at war over what had happened. By early evening, Alder Bend Drive didn't look like a quiet residential street anymore. It looked like a stage. Every lawn seemed to have its own audience, from couples leaning against porch railings to retirees in lawn chairs sipping iced tea. Lorraine's walk down the driveway with her bags was a slow parade that nobody wanted to miss. Terrence stayed by the front door, arms crossed, watching her pass the crowd. Some neighbors avoided eye contact. Others gave her small waves, as if afraid to pick a side too openly. But there were a few, mostly the same people who always backed her in HOA meetings, who nodded in approval, murmuring things like, "We know you meant well." Lorraine didn't miss a beat. She tossed her hair back and gave a thin-lipped smile to those who still seemed to support her. Victor Delmar, still leaning on his cane, stood by the curb with his dog, a wiry little terrier named Duke. "Don't let her spin it, Terrence," he called out. "She'll be telling people you're the one who should apologize." Lorraine turned sharply. "That's not what I'm saying, Victor, but someone had to do something. We can't just let houses sit empty for days with strangers coming and going." "Strangers?" Victor shot back. "That was his cleaner. You've seen her before. You just don't like admitting you were wrong." From across the street, a woman named Denise Calhoun raised her voice. "She wasn't wrong to be cautious. Crime's up everywhere, and you all know it. Better to be safe than sorry." Victor barked out a laugh. "Breaking into your neighbor's house isn't safe. It's criminal." The murmurs grew louder. People were no longer speaking in hushed tones. They were having full-on debates on their lawns. A younger neighbor, Anthony Vega, chimed in from his driveway. "I don't think it's that simple. Maybe Lorraine overstepped, but she's not some burglar. She's been here forever. She looks out for the place." "She looks out for herself," Victor countered. "This isn't the first time she's crossed the line. Remember when she told the delivery guy to leave because she didn't recognize him? The poor kid lost his job over it." Denise's face tightened. "That's not the same thing," Anthony shrugged. "Feels like it's in the same ballpark." From inside the house, Terrence could hear every word. It was like the volume of the street had been turned up. He stepped out onto the porch, catching the eye of the group across the street. "You all can argue all night," he said loudly, "but none of you had to walk into your own home and find someone else living in it. Until that happens, you don't know how it feels." Some heads nodded in agreement. Others looked away. Lorraine stopped in the middle of the street, her bags sitting at her feet. "I've been keeping this neighborhood safe for years, and I'll keep doing it. If that makes me the bad guy in your story, so be it." "You're not the bad guy in my story," Terrence said, his tone even. "You're just someone who doesn't know when to stop." There was a brief silence. Then Victor shook his head and muttered, "That's the problem. She never has." The officers began to wrap things up, stepping toward their cars. Officer Delaney gave Terrence a small nod. "We'll file the report. If you want to pursue charges, you'll need to contact the county attorney's office." "I'm thinking about it," Terrence said, his gaze still on Lorraine. As the patrol cars pulled away, the crowd slowly began to disperse, but not without a few last-minute whispers. A pair of neighbors in matching golf shirts leaned in close to each other as they walked, their voices just loud enough for Terrence to catch fragments. "Could have been worse. Lucky nothing happened. He's probably going to make a big deal out of it." It was clear the street wasn't going to forget this anytime soon. The question was whether it would fade into just another HOA controversy, or whether it was about to explode into something that could drag in lawyers, committees, and months of bad blood. But Terrence wasn't ready to let it fade quietly, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized legal action might be the only way to set things straight, even if it meant making new enemies in his own backyard. The crowd had thinned to just a few stragglers by the time Terrence stepped back inside. The air felt heavier than it had when he first arrived home, not because of the Arizona heat, but because he knew this wasn't going to blow over. Officer Ramirez lingered in the foyer, flipping his notepad closed. "Mr. Blakemore, if you want to press charges for trespassing or unlawful entry, you'll need to contact the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. We've documented everything, the wine, the mail, the guest room. It's all in the report." Terrence rubbed the bridge of his nose. "What about the key she used? Isn't that a violation on its own?" Delaney nodded. "It can be considered unlawful possession of a key, especially since she was no longer on the HOA committee. but that would probably be rolled into the trespassing charge. What's the process? Terrence asked. You'd go down to the county office, file the complaint, and they'd decide whether to prosecute. Given the documentation, it's a strong case. But I'll be honest, it'll be public. Neighbors will know. It's not like this will stay private, Delaney said. Terrence gave a dry laugh. It's already public. Half the street was out there. Ramirez slipped his pen into his pocket. Then the question is whether you want to make an example of it. Some people decide it's not worth the hassle. Others decide it's the principle that matters. Before Terrence could answer, a knock came at the door. Victor stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, Duke trotting behind him. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say, if you go through with charges, you've got my statement. I'll back you up. Delaney glanced at him. Were you a witness to her being in the house? Victor leaned on his cane. Not today, no. But I saw her here last week, parked in your driveway, carrying grocery bags inside. I figured you'd asked her to check on the place, but now I see I was wrong. That's useful, Ramirez said. We'll add that to the report. Victor looked at Terrence. She's going to spin this, you know. Turn it into a story about how she was looking out for you, how you overreacted. The only way to stop that is to put it on record, make it clear she crossed the line. Terrence considered that. He knew Victor was right. In neighborhoods like this, truth wasn't decided by facts alone. It was shaped by repetition, by whose version got told the most. And Lorraine had plenty of practice telling hers. Delaney took a step toward the door. We'll leave you to think about it, but the sooner you decide, the better. These things move faster when the complaint is fresh. When the officers left, Victor stayed behind, lowering his voice. I've been here long enough to know she'll keep pushing boundaries unless someone stops her. She's pulled stunts before, but nothing this bold. If you let this go, it sends a message that she can get away with it. I hear you, Terrence said. But if I take this to court, it's going to be a circus. People will pick sides, and I'll have to deal with the fallout. Fallout's already here, Victor said flatly. You've got half the street whispering that you're ungrateful for her so-called protection. The other half's furious on your behalf. That's division she caused, not you. Terrence leaned against the doorway, staring at the line of pavers leading down to the street. I just got home, man. I didn't want any of this. And now I'm talking about court. That's the thing about people like her, Victor said, adjusting his grip on the cane. They don't think about the mess they leave behind. They think about how it makes them look in the moment. You either set boundaries now, or you spend the rest of your time here reacting to her. Terrence nodded slowly. He knew Victor was right. But he also knew this wasn't just about Lorraine anymore. It was about every neighbor watching to see how far they could push without consequence. All right, Terrence said finally. I'll call the county office Monday morning. Victor gave a small nod of approval. Good. I'll walk you through what to expect. As Victor left, Terrence looked around his foyer. The wine glasses still sat on the coffee table, lipstick stains catching the light. His grandmother's plates were back in the cabinet, but it didn't change the fact that someone had treated his home like their personal playground. But deciding to press charges was one thing. Confronting Lorraine about it face to face was another, and that moment was coming a lot sooner than Terrence thought. Terrence didn't expect to see Lorraine again that same weekend. He figured she'd retreat, lick her wounds, and start planting her version of events in the neighborhood grapevine. But on Sunday morning, as he stepped outside to pick up the paper, there she was, standing at the end of his driveway, arms folded, like she had every right to be there. He paused mid-step. You lost? Lorraine shook her head. No, I'm here to clear the air before you make a mistake. Terrence walked toward her slowly. The only mistake would be letting this slide. She tilted her head. So it's true. You're going to try to press charges? That's the plan, he said flatly. I've already spoken to the police about it. Her eyebrows arched slightly. You really want to go down that road? You think it's going to make you look like the reasonable one? I don't care how it makes me look, Terrence replied. What I care about is making sure you never pull this stunt again. With me or anyone else. Lorraine took a step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You think you're the first person to try and stand up to me in this neighborhood? They either move or they learn to keep quiet. You should think carefully about which one you want to be. He let out a short, humorless laugh. So you're actually threatening me now? It's not a threat, she said, her tone measured. It's a reality check. People here trust me. I've been part of this community for decades. You've been here, what, 4 years? 5? 4, he said. And in those 4 years I've managed to live without breaking into someone else's house and throwing wine parties in it. Lorraine's jaw tightened. You're exaggerating. Really? You want me to list everything you did? You called the police on me for being in my own home. You told neighbors I abandoned the place. You used my kitchen, my wine, my guest room. You went through my mail, and you expect me to treat you like some misunderstood do-gooder? Lorraine shifted her stance, crossing her arms again. I made a judgment call. You might not like it, but it came from a good place. We've had break-ins in nearby neighborhoods. People have been targeted. That's not what this was, Terrence said firmly. You weren't preventing a crime. You were taking advantage of an opportunity. And you're mad because you got caught. Her eyes flashed, but she didn't speak right away. Instead, she looked toward the houses on either side, both of which had blinds tilted just enough to catch glimpses of the exchange. You think they're all going to back you? She asked finally. Some will, sure, but others will think you're overreacting. They'll remember you as the guy who dragged a neighbor into court instead of handling it privately. Terrence didn't flinch. Good. Let them remember me as the guy who didn't let someone walk all over him. Lorraine gave a small, dismissive laugh. You'll regret it. Court's messy. You'll lose time, money, and maybe even friends here. I'd rather lose a few fake friends than let you think this is acceptable, he said. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The air between them taut, the sound of a lawnmower in the distance cutting through the stillness. Then Terrence stepped past her, heading for the mailbox. We're done here, Lorraine. If you have something to say, you can say it to my lawyer. She turned as he walked away. You'll see, Terrence, people will take my side. They always do. He didn't look back, not this time. She stood there for another few seconds before finally picking up her pace and walking down the street, her sandals clicking against the pavement. From the porch across the street, Victor called over, She bothering you again? Terrence shook his head. Not anymore. She just doesn't know it yet. But as much as that conversation felt like a final word, it wasn't. Because the fallout from that confrontation was about to ripple through every HOA meeting, barbecue, and casual chat in Maple Crest, and the consequences wouldn't stop at harsh words. On Monday morning, Terrence followed through. He drove downtown to the Maricopa County Attorney's office, paperwork from the police in hand, and filed the official complaint. The woman at the counter took the documents, stamped them, and explained the process in a matter-of-fact tone. The case would be reviewed, and if approved, Lorraine would receive a summons. Trespassing, unlawful possession of a key, and possible tampering with mail were all on the table. It was oddly anticlimactic. No dramatic moment, just a quiet signature that set the wheels in motion. But Terrence knew the real drama would play out back in the neighborhood. By Tuesday evening, word had spread like wildfire. Lorraine hadn't been served yet, but she clearly knew something was coming. When Terrence stepped outside to take the trash bins to the curb, he spotted her at the corner, talking to Denise Calhoun and 2 other women. Their posture alone said it all. Heads tilted in, hands gesturing, Lorraine's voice carrying just far enough to let him catch fragments. Making a big deal. All I did was try to help. He's blowing it out of proportion. Denise spotted him and offered a tight smile, but the others didn't bother. Victor wandered over, Duke trotting behind. She's been on a campaign, he said quietly. Telling people you're suing her out of spite. Terrence smirked. Spite would be buying her house and painting it neon orange. This is just accountability. The real turning point came at the next HOA meeting that Thursday. Normally the monthly meetings were tedious affairs. Landscaping budgets, pool maintenance, arguments about paint colors. But that night, the community room was full. Folding chairs lined every wall, and people were standing in the back. The president, a mild-mannered man named Raymond Klein, tried to start with the agenda, but Lorraine raised her hand before he got through the first item. I'd like to address the smear campaign going on against me, she announced. Raymond sighed. Lorraine, this isn't... It is HOA business, she insisted. "One of our members is attempting to drag me into court over something that was clearly a misunderstanding. I acted in the best interest of this community." A few murmurs of agreement floated through the crowd, but just as many heads shook. Terrence stood. "Since you're talking about me, let's be clear. You lived in my home without permission for nearly 2 weeks. You used my belongings, drank my wine, opened my mail, and told people I abandoned my property. That's not a misunderstanding. You weren't here," Lorraine said, folding her arms. "And that gives you the right to move in." Terrence shot back. "You called the police on me for being in my own house, Lorraine. Then you acted like you were doing me a favor." Victor's voice came from the back. "He's right. I saw you going in and out of his place while he was gone. You weren't just checking on it, you were living there." That opened the floodgates. Another neighbor, a quiet woman named Iris Moreno, spoke up. "She told me he'd given her permission. That's the only reason I didn't say anything." Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. Lorraine's composure faltered for the first time. "I never said—" "Yes, you did," Iris interrupted firmly. Raymond raised his hands. "All right, this meeting is getting off track. The HOA has no jurisdiction over personal legal disputes. Whatever's happening between you two will be decided outside this room." Lorraine sank back into her seat, but the damage was done. The looks from the crowd told Terrence that at least half of them now doubted her version of events. The next morning, the official papers were delivered to her. Terrence didn't see it happen, but Victor did, and he made a point of telling him. "Courier came by around 10. She wouldn't take the envelope at first. Had to be told twice it was a legal document." Over the next few days, Lorraine was noticeably quieter. No more standing at the corner to chat, no more walking the street like she was patrolling. She still had her loyal few, but their conversations were now held behind closed doors. Terrence, meanwhile, felt a shift. Neighbors who had stayed neutral started giving him nods, short greetings, even words of support. He wasn't naive. He knew not everyone had changed their mind, but the balance had tipped. By the time his attorney called to confirm the first hearing date, he felt something he hadn't since arriving home that Friday afternoon: control over the situation. But while the legal process would play out in court, the personal side of this battle had already left its mark, and Terrence knew he'd never see his neighborhood or some of its residents the same way again. The first hearing was short. Lorraine appeared in a navy pantsuit, her expression carefully neutral, but she avoided looking directly at Terrence. The judge didn't make any sweeping rulings that day. It was mostly procedural. But the message was clear. The case was moving forward. Walking out of the courthouse, Terrence felt lighter, but not because of any victory. It was the realization that he'd done something a lot of people avoid. He'd pushed back, even when it meant stepping into an uncomfortable spotlight. Back in the neighborhood, the atmosphere had shifted. The tension was still there, but quieter, like a storm that had moved further down the horizon. Some neighbors stopped by to talk, not long conversations, just quick check-ins, like they wanted him to know they'd noticed. Others kept their distance. Lorraine herself was practically invisible, her once daily neighborhood walks reduced to quick trips from her front door to her car. One evening, Victor came over with Duke. They sat on the back patio, the desert sun dropping low behind the palm trees. "You know," Victor said, "people think it's just about the legal stuff. But what you did, it's about setting a line. Once you make it clear where that line is, people think twice before crossing it." Terrence nodded. "I didn't want this fight. I just wanted to come home. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, if I let this go, I'm basically saying it's okay for someone to decide my boundaries for me. That's the thing," Victor said. "If you don't define your boundaries, someone else will." Terrence thought about that for a long moment. The entire situation had been exhausting. The police, the neighbors' gossip, the legal steps. But it was also a mirror. It made him see how quickly assumptions can be turned into stories, and how those stories can harden into reputations if they're not challenged. The next HOA meeting was noticeably calmer. Lorraine was there, sitting quietly in the middle row. She didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't interrupt. A few people glanced at her, but most kept their eyes on the agenda. Whatever her version of damage control had been, it was clear the power she once wielded in the room wasn't the same anymore. Afterward, as people were leaving, Terrence caught sight of her near the door. She met his eyes for a split second before looking away. There was no nod, no forced smile, just silence. And in that silence, he realized something. He didn't need her apology. What he needed was exactly what he'd gotten, the space to live in his own home without interference. That night, Terrence poured himself a glass of wine, his wine, and sat in the same sunroom where Lorraine had once hosted her ladies' night. The house felt different now, not just because it was his again, but because he'd reclaimed it in every sense. He knew there would still be whispers, and that some people would always see him through the lens of this incident. But that was fine. He couldn't control their stories, only his own. And that's the thing about situations like this. People will tell you to let it go, to keep the peace, to avoid rocking the boat. But peace without respect isn't peace. It's just quiet resentment. Respect comes from knowing when to stand your ground, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you. If there's one lesson here, it's this. Protect your space. Not just your physical space, but the boundaries that keep your life yours. The moment you let someone else decide where those boundaries are, you've already given up more than you realize. So the next time someone oversteps, whether it's a neighbor, a co-worker, or even a friend, remember you have a right to say, "This is where it stops." And if you've stuck with me through this story, I'd like to hear what you think. Have you ever had to deal with someone who crossed the line? And how did you handle it? Leave your thoughts below, because these conversations matter. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. The kind that makes you think, makes you feel, and maybe even makes you see your own life a little differently. Because sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought with fists or headlines. They're fought in the everyday moments when you decide that enough is enough.